Welcome to everyone who's joining us today. I know we have some folks who are trickling in still, but we also have a packed agenda today of different topics to walk through. Welcome to Day 2 Chart Chat. It's more than just chit chat, it's chart chat. We're excited to have folks joining us, we hope from not just around the US, but all over the world, to have a conversation about different charts and themes and things from the world of data visualization. For a round of quick introductions, I'm Amanda Makulec. I'm the data visualization lead at Excella and volunteer as the operations director for the Data Visualization Society. I'm excited to be here with my collaborators today, the three authors of the big book of dashboards, Jeff Shaffer, Steve Wexler, and Andy Cotgreave. Welcome, guys.
Hey.
Hi, Amanda.
Welcome.
Excited to be here today. Today we'll be talking through a few things during our session, which we've ambitiously, I think, usually try to time box to be shorter than an hour, but often run up against that hour mark. First, we're going to tackle the topic of modern dashboard design and talk about what that word means and what that looks like, and have a little chat about how we all feel about modern dashboard design. Then we'll jump into a conversation about how NBC reported unemployment and a different kind of chart that went away from the line charts and bar charts that we've been seeing, and what we all thought of that chart and that design. Andy will pick that piece up. And then finally, we'll have a lightning round featuring our favorite chart of the last month, perhaps, the beautiful tornado diagram with rainbow loops everywhere. We'll give you a chance to weigh in and give your thoughts about that chart through Menti. We'll throw up a Menti poll link about 2/3 of the way through so we can get your thoughts. And we'll close out with some discussion and questions and answers at the very end. We're also excited to let you know that at the end of today's chart chat, if you want to keep the chat going, you can join the chart chat after party happening either at noon your time if you're in the Eastern time zone like me, or a little bit earlier, a little bit later, depending on where you are in the world. But if you'd like to keep having a conversation, we'll open up a new Zoom room that you can join and have a conversation with some of the folks who are here today. Thanks a lot to Chris Love for that great suggestion about how we can enable people to keep that conversation going on these various different topics. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to give us a deep dive into what is it that people mean when they say modern dashboards.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Modern dashboard design, that's been a real topic of late on the data visualization forums and on Twitter going around. I should confirm co-authors here. You can see my screen. Everything good?
Yep.
All right. When I hear the word modern dashboard, the word modern always bothers me a little bit. It reminds me of a classical music station here in Cincinnati. They do a thing called the Composer's Date Book, and their tagline is reminding you that all music was once modern. Even the latest of pieces, oldest of pieces were once new. It's a little bit like this assignment that a student turned in one time for my data visualization class, where the final project, final version 2, was actually not the final version of the Tableau workbook. And we've probably all seen that. And when we think about modern, what's going to change? What's going to make us think of 2020 modern versus 1998 modern? So to give you a little bit of background on that, I have a 1954 Ford F100 pickup truck, bright red. I've been driving it a lot in the nice weather around Cincinnati. But the advertisements back then, here's the GM competitor truck at that point. The tagline is "Get a modern truck." And at the same year, Ford was talking about its modern styling. So modern is, not a new word. It's not a modern word. It's been around for a long time, right? So as it comes to dashboard design or graphic design, where this term came from, Zach had an interesting question that I love. Does modern design now just mean rounded corners? And it's funny you say that, Zach, because, I look back and look at my truck and I'm like, maybe that's the key to it all. My truck is pretty rounded. It has rounded corners too. The rounded corner idea has had a lot of research and has a lot of discussion around it. There is a lot of research in the field of material design, graphic design, that we like rounded corners. corners, and it's true. The iPhone is a good example of that. The device itself has rounded corners. The apps that you see on the left-hand side have rounded corners. Our furniture, our TV, we like rounded corners. Part of that just comes from nature. Where it's ingrained in us. Things that are sharp are kind of dangerous. Now, this picture here, this is my household. My two daughters, my daughter on the left, Elle, she has hedgehogs. She's had two hedgehogs, and that's, that's not a picture of our hedgehog, but that is Rose, our hedgehog, looks similar to that. On the right is a ferret, and my daughter Nina has a ferret. Just acquired a ferret a few months back, and so I've had experience with both of these. Now I can tell you, you're going to be careful with the hedgehog. You're going to know that as you're approaching it, even though it's rounded kind of in shape, those sharp edges, the angular edges, you know that you're going to get it if you get too close. So I think it's a natural biological reaction to things in our environment along those lines. As it gets to graphic design and dashboard design, there's been ideas that it's more inviting, that you might be more likely to hit the subscribe button or the contact button on the website or your dashboard button if it had rounded corners. And this is kind of we're talking about one aspect of design here, but it is an interesting topic nonetheless. About 4 or 5 years ago, I did a blog post about round containers, messing with the embed code of Tableau to embed your visualization with rounded containers, and I played with drop shadows and other things. It's interesting today, though, when we talk about this quote-unquote modern design, it's a little broader than that. Roddy has a tweet out there that said for him, it's more talking about the scaling, the navigation bars, anchored containers, templates, the UI and UX experience for the user, not just rounded corners and say drop shadows. So let's look at a few examples of what we're talking about, at least in a dashboard or visualization world. So here's some examples from the community. Robert Janizik has a great blog post I'll talk about in a minute, but this is a dashboard he did for a modern dashboard design. Notice the little cards, the tiles, if you will, they have drop shadows around them, the rounding even of the button menus, the navigation over on the side panel. In this example, Amar went the opposite direction and sort of pressed them in, not bringing them out, but pressed them in on a card using the shadows in the opposite direction to create this modern dashboard. Very clean design here. And Chantilly's from Lovalytics designed this modern dashboard. Again, the round containers with the drop shadow and even the round bands, if you will, and bar charts built into it, the round design. So let's go a little deeper into this modern dashboard design. Robert Janicek's blog post is a great resource for this. We'll post the links for this, but he really goes into detail about what defines this, and it's more than just rounded corners. For a definition of it, we'll talk about larger type, font selection, drop shadows, neumorphism, animation, rounded corners, and white space. Now, I'm not going to look at all of these. It's interesting if you've been following the Big Book of Dashboards, if you've been to one of our workshops, we've talked a lot about larger type when it comes to bands. We've talked about the font contrast and font selection, and we've even talked about white space. So none of this is new. We've been talking about these things for years, but putting them together with other things like neumorphism and drop shadows and the rounded corners and the animation. So let's talk about the shadow, the drop shadow for a minute. Visual perception. If we're living in a world where light comes from above a single light source, we are ingrained to see shadow in this way. And this object that you're looking at, you sort of see the letter H on the screen. That's because, and the balls sort of pop out on the letter H. That's because the light is coming from above, and the top part's in light, the bottom part is in shadow. If I were to rotate this for you right in front of your eyes, the opposite effect happens, right? The H now looks pressed in like a Mars chart, and the other two balls look like they're pressed out. you can't help but see it that way. We're just ingrained because we live in a world where we have a single light source from above. And if I take this picture from Wikipedia, it's a crater, just a crater, and I turn it upside down. Now all of a sudden we're hiking up a hill. You can't help but see it that way. It doesn't look like a crater in our knowing that if we put the shadow at the bottom of the object, it's going to look pressed in. That brings us, thinking about that drop shadow, that brings us sort of to the next topic, that it's not just about the drop shadow or the rounded corners. It goes a little further, and we'll talk about this graphic design concept of skeuomorphism. Skeuomorphism is where we make an object look like its real-world counterpart. We want to make the button on our webpage look like a real button in the real world. Then there's this trend of flat design where we don't have it's really just one canvas, right? Nothing comes forward or backward on our Z canvas. It's just all flat. And then this neumorphism is kind of in between that. It sort of looks like a real world object, but it's not really. It comes out from the screen just by adding the drop shadow. Now, it is a little bit restrictive because to do this properly, you have to have an off-white background. It has to be sort of gray, a light gray background or a light blue background, because you want to put a white shadow on the top side of it and a dark shadow on the bottom side of it. So how does that all come together? Well, I think, talking about this on a dashboard design, I don't mind it. I like it. I think it looks good, but my preference has been more to flat design. So if I think about the dashboards I designed for the big book of dashboards, they use some of the same technique: larger bands, font selection, we remove clutter, we use white space, we design to a grid, but as opposed to neumorphism and drop shadow, it's really more of a flat design with a very, very simple color. And so you'll see that throughout the dashboards that are in our book. We didn't publish anything that uses neumorphism or modern dashboard design. Here's a great example that Ludwig Taverner did. It's a combination of these things that we're talking about. Now you'll notice he doesn't use a round container here for the rounded design, but he does use the drop shadow very effectively on these objects. And so these cards come off the screen. He uses round objects, over here on the right side for the bands. I did an effort to, I played with this, downloaded the dashboard, and made a flat design version of this. So here's my flat design version. I love the color of this. I love the grid design. I love everything about this dashboard, and I don't think that the flat design takes anything away from it. I still think it's a beautifully effective dashboard, even with the flat design. I should have checked his Tableau public profile page because he did his own flat design and would have saved me the time of doing it. But here's his version of flat design without the drop shadows there. The other part is the animation. Yvette did this these beautiful menu buttons, button designs, where you hover over and the dashboard action kind of takes effect. This could be in combination with the other things. Could be rounded corners, could be neumorphism buttons, could be flat design, but the button design is another interesting thing, and this is where animations can potentially play a role, and with some of the things that Tableau offers now, we can do those things. The last thing I just want to talk about before we enter into some dialogue on this is, can we go too far with these things by making everything round, by adding drop shadow, by doing too much? And I think the first thing that hits me is when we start messing with the data, when we start adding these designs to the data itself. This is a rounded bar chart that comes from Chantilly's dashboard. I think Chantilly gets away with it here because she has the actual numbers as labels in the rounded bars, but I get concerned when I see this because it potentially distorts the data depending on how these rounded bar charts are designed. To see things like this, and you don't know where it stops and starts and you can't get an accurate picture, we're already bad enough at trying to compare slices of a stacked bar, and then we're going to make it harder by trying to make a round edge out of it. There is a great blog post by Jonathan Allenby about this where you have these rounded bar charts on both ends, and he talks about that a value of 1 actually shows out to 1.2, and if you round the bottom side of it, it even gets worse because then you're actually showing a length of 1.4. So you can really distort your data and not get a clear picture of it. So if you're looking for accuracy in this data, that's a concern where I think some of these techniques can maybe go a little too far. So that's the setup I had for this, and I'm gonna let my co-authors jump in on this topic.
I have so many feelings, Jeff. And part of this question for me is always, I see all these cool things that people are able to do and can do. And when I think about who's doing them, people like Chantilly, who are wickedly fast and good at this, I think about how much time it might take someone who's kind of a mid or junior analyst to replicate some of this in a business context. And the question I ask, even though they're lovely and they make beautiful analytical applications, is the increased engagement you get if you were to A/B test this worth whatever number of additional billable hours that someone on my team of consultants would have to charge a client to transform a flat dashboard into something that looks like this? And is that money that my client wants to spend? So this is maybe an example of what we see on the beautiful work in Tableau Public. How much does it translate into where our clients see value for money?
Yeah,
go ahead, Jeff.
I can tell you how long it took to make some of these slides in PowerPoint, and PowerPoint has the tools for drop shadow and these various things. A tool like Tableau or a business intelligence platform doesn't have those, so you're using other tricks. And to quote a famous Joe Mako quote, is the juice worth the squeeze?
I love that line.
Yeah, I just depend on how long it takes to do this, right?
Well, and we already have to argue for like the value of data visualization sometimes and why you should invest in these things. And what I've seen people connect with the most is speed to seeing insights and value and things like that. And if someone hasn't mastered the fundamentals, like you pointed out, the ones where this is most effective is where the charts are just really good. And you could either put them as something flat or not, and they're still just good charts.
So
Go ahead, Steve.
That's a really important point. So I'm delighted to see people making sure that the charts themselves are good, and if they want to garner additional engagement by turning their Ford Pinto into a beautiful Tesla because of the appointments around it, that's great. I'd much rather see that effort and not a radial bar chart or a Voronoi tree map or something like that, and you're using good charts. Maybe the argument about the rounded corners and things like that. I've been an advocate for lollipop charts, but I've now been convinced to make the little dot at the end much smaller than what I had originally proposed in the book. The other issue I have with this is, do you have that additional time and budget, as Amanda said? And maybe if this is customer facing, it's worth it. But I think, oh my God, you know what? We need to put another chart in this thing, and the dashboard's going to have to be a little bit larger. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh my God, all these things that fit just perfectly in the mask, throw it out, start again. And until that's a much easier thing to build, just realize the particular hell you may be in for this. But you're in all these examples, the charts themselves were not dumbed down. These are good, solid ways of relating the data. So if you want to put the extra effort into getting the extrusion or protrusion, well, God bless you.
Yeah. I'll add my challenge with this. I mean, gosh, we all just sound like grumpy old men, right? Going, oh, obviously I can't. Oh, Steve, Jeff, and I sound like grumpy old men. Going, oh, no, now saying this. But my challenge with this approach is that modern, to me, equates to a sacrifice of information density, and I not everybody needs to build a Stephen Few type dashboard, right? But Stephen Few's dashboards were dense, and if you were sat down and poring over that, you had a whole book's worth of information on a single piece of paper or screen in front of you. And the more we bring in the shadows, the more we bring in the white space, the more we risk. It's like, okay, well, so with the one on the screen, we've got 8 pieces of information. maybe 10 if you depending on how you count it, right? So modern design seems to sacrifice information, and we shouldn't make something look beautiful at the price of packing in the right amount of information for our end users. So that's my big challenge.
That's interesting. I will say, you know, with looking at students who start out in this, or people who are just getting started in creating reports, it's usually the opposite problem. I try to, they dense everything up, and it's too dense, and they need to add more white space. And so it's an interesting topic. You know, can you go too far with the white space? Can you give up too much real estate? But I will just add, I find these dashboards beautiful, and it does create engagement for me. I want to look at them and see the little details of it. It's just, I guess if I were making it for internal use, probably wouldn't spend the time on polishing it up. If I had something that was going externally, maybe it's worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can see my screen, but you know, my favorite dashboard from the book, the CTT wireless dashboard, you know, that is a dense dashboard of information, but it's beautifully balanced in terms of white space and grid layout. And I'm not sure it's modern dashboard design, but, you know, if your business needs or your work or your organization or your colleagues need lots of information, don't just make the corners rounded to make their life feel
Jeff,
softer.
I just wanted to amplify one thing when you were talking about the rounded corners, and I decided to get more grumpy old men joining me at the moment. The rounded corners are, you know, Steve Jobs was obsessed with this. And if you go back to the development, not to the Macintosh, but the Lisa, you know, which was the predecessor to it, and the whole driving Bill Atkinson, who was one of the designers, he insisted on dialog boxes with round corners. And there was a discussion of, it's going to be too slow to render these things. And Atkinson had to figure out, how can I make sure these dialog box, you know, will render quickly? But Jobs was adamant that the dialog boxes had to have round corners. I highly encourage people to read Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, and there's a huge segment of that devoted to that aesthetic, which continues to the buttons that are in the icons that are on the iPhone.
Well, let me throw out a question then. I mean, are we just naysaying this only because it takes time to build in the tools that we have? If the tool could build this quickly, would it change your opinion of it?
Well, and I might add, if we can maybe wrap up this segment and move on to our next challenging topic with Andy, my plea to anyone who does tackle this in a business context, as someone who's had a team that manages dashboards or hands things over to clients, is if you choose to go this approach and someone else has to manage it, please put some detailed links and in your documentation about how when they have to add a new chart, they can get that same effect.
That was Chris Love.
When it comes to maintenance, someone made this great comment in the chat about when it comes to maintenance, make sure that you consider those principles, like what
Chris Love made that comment.
Kelly Martin, right? She talked about making sure you're building for the day that you can't show back up for work, and making sure that we're thinking about that. How would someone else add additional views that look just like these?
There is an after-hours conversation coming up in 35 minutes, everybody, because this conversation is not going to get concluded right now.
So, Andy, you're going to dig in, Andy. I know you had pulled up an interesting chart from this past month looking at a different way of looking at unemployment. So, do you want to pull that?
I did. Can you see an unemployment chart?
We do.
You do. All right. So, thank you for your conversation about the modern dashboard designs, Jeff. That was excellent. Everybody keep the comments coming because they are really interesting, reading the comments you're putting. Okay, but let's talk about this chart that appeared in MBS News on April the 14th. It's showing unemployment by week as a percentage change relative to the same week in the previous year. The darker the color, the bigger the change. So you can see where the coronavirus situation created an unemployment cliff edge. Each row represents one of the 50 US states, and each column represents a week going from March 2019 to April 2020. So what do we see? We see the unemployment change. Now, why do I want to talk about this chart? I want to talk about the chart that inspired this one and my reaction to that chart, and how my reaction to that chart is not the same as my reaction to this chart, and essentially how I tie myself in knots trying to critique or think, how could they have visualized this chart differently?
Andy, your chart's looking a little bit blurry for a few of us, I think. I'm not sure if
Is it? I don't know what I can do about that.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's not too bad. It's part of it is just when it renders clearly
Right.
on the screen. So it's looking less pixelated for me than it did before.
Perhaps my children are watching Netflix when they were explicitly told not to for the duration of this live stream. Any degradation in service, I'm going to attribute to them. Sorry. But hopefully we'll continue. It'll be okay. But thanks for letting me know. So let's go back to 2015. The Wall Street Journal did this piece, this piece is by Tynan DeBold and Dov Friedman. This chart and the charts in this article won gold in the 2015 Information is Beautiful Awards. It's amazing. This chart is showing polio and the impact of vaccinations on prevalence of the disease across the US. So same setup. We've got states and we have years in this case. The black line indicates when the vaccination was introduced. And you can see lots of polio, no polio, right? A very stark, very powerful visualization. And this chart inspired the NBC chart. I got in touch with the people who made the NBC chart just this month, and they had taken this one as inspiration. But the thing I wanted to talk about is the reaction and the backlash to this chart on the screen and how that applies to the 2020 version that's just come out this month. So back in 2015, this visualization and these visualizations were published, and people were like, cool, wow. And they shared it, and they shared it, and they shared it. And people engaged with these charts. They dug in, they were hovering their mouths, they were looking at these charts, they were seeing a story, and they were diving in. And then, inevitably, along come the data-viz police, and you start seeing the messages. Oh, hang on, is this the fastest way to insight with this data? Until somebody says, this should have been a line chart. And this line makes me cross. In fact, it inspired me to write a byline in InfoWorld in which I proposed Cotgreave's Law, which was based on Godwins Law, if you're familiar with that. And it essentially said this: the longer that a novel visualization exists, the probability that someone is going to say it should have been a line or a bar chart approaches 1. Let me explain. One of the posts that inspired, one of the reasons that I was inspired to come up with that law was Randall Olson, who wrote an amazing blog post. Randall Olson is an incredible thinker, a great guy, and it is a great post. But he revisited the vaccination charts and said, well, you know, they should have been a line chart. And he pointed out valid flaws with this vaccination chart. He pointed out that a rainbow color ramp is not really very good for a continuous measure. Correct. He also pointed out that this particular color ramp is not very good for people with color vision deficiency. Also correct. But he also said, that's too much information. You know what? If you just aggregate it and draw that, the insight is communicated a lot quicker. And at that point, if your goal is speed to insight, then he's right. He's 100% right. But the thing we need to consider is the balance between speed to insight, the need to engage, and whether we need to communicate the gist or everything, or summarize things or show disaggregated data. So we mustn't forget that the reason the polio or the vaccination charts were so successful was because of their novelty. They looked different. They stopped people in their tracks, and they dug in and they engaged. Now, yeah, maybe they didn't get the accurate insight of the data, but they stopped and engaged. And our goal as data communicators is to balance the novelty, the efficiency, the accuracy, the gist, right? So that's why I got a bit upset with the backlash in 2015. Let's go to 2020. I looked at this chart. I thought, wow, this is the same chart as 2015. Awesome. I love it when people take inspiration from great charts. And then I thought, you know what? This should have been a line chart, which is somewhat awkward given my history with this visualization style. Now, why did I think this should have been a line chart? I think, and I'm looking to my co-presenters here to argue against me or tell me I'm right or wrong in a moment, and you can tell me this in the comments too. I think I didn't like this chart because the color ramp is broken, that's an evocative word, by the extreme values. We can see things are ticking along in nice light blue, unemployment's like okay, and then coronavirus happens and boom, it just becomes appalling. But the problem is, these extreme values are concentrated right at the very end of this color ramp. And also, I can't look at blue and tell you how less something is compared to a brown. Now, I have no sort of mental note of exactly what the difference between these sections is. So I looked at it and I went, well, it goes from blue to brown. It doesn't really create the same story that I found so effective in the vaccination chart. Here, it just seemed easier on the eye, which is important, and the whole change was less extreme, so it made more effective. Here, the gist was not subtle enough for me, and I'm interested in other people's opinions. But I'll just wrap up by thinking, well, in preparing these slides, I thought I'd better put my money where my mouth is, because, you know, on this chart, on this session, we're the professionals. Can I draw the line chart that would have been better? So I took the data. I built the same chart in Tableau. This is a Tableau version of the same data. I couldn't get the color ramp right, but I got close enough. And I tried different versions. I tried just showing the raw numbers, but one particular week in California is such an outlier, it doesn't work. It just dominates the color ramp. I tried drawing it as a line chart, but the white space just was a joke. It didn't work. And I tried small multiples, and I didn't want to do independent axes because I wanted it to be able to compare one state to another, but it just didn't look right. At which point it was like, oh, well, we're presenting in 2 hours, so I'd better actually build my slides. But I couldn't actually find a better version of this chart. So here's the conclusion. I loved this chart, and I thought it deserved all the plaudits, and I got a bit cross with the backlash. I love this chart too, but I had the same backlash that I complained about this time. So in the end, Amanda, Jeff, Steve, should it have been a line chart? In the end, I don't know. I've tied myself in knots preparing for this session. And I think that's okay because it's hard, right? So I want to congratulate the journalists who made all these charts. Should it have been a line chart, everybody? What do you think?
I vote no. I'm a firm vote on team novelty on this one, and that the point of this chart is to show that in a very long period of history, looking across many, many, many weeks, that we have hit a brick wall of issues and challenges right now. And that is exactly the feeling I get looking at this chart, is that I'm awash in seeing that basically like the last 10% of those columns are a really dark color, and I do not care about the rest of it being hard to compare.
I'm with Amanda on this one. Because I don't think, so I'm a huge believer in bar and line charts. And why do we use them? Because it allows us to make accurate comparisons quickly. And is that what's important here? Is it important that I see, well, that's 52 times as big as that. That thing's only versus 47 times as big as that. Oh my God, you had this horrible condition of polio, and look how quickly it was eradicated. Do I need to see how much the number of cases and how much it came down? And somebody used the term here saying, oh my God, it looks like we hit a brick wall in the new thing. And I think the takeaway is, oh my gosh, this is just orders of magnitude difference. Look at this. The color ramp completely breaks. And I think that's the thing that you're trying to impart. If you want to do the accurate comparison and see, oh, it's actually 67 times as big versus 61 times as big, then you give the line or the bar chart. So I've written about this before, where sometimes I think what I call an emotional comparison is more important than an accurate comparison.
All right. What do you think, Jeff?
I'm just going to help show the trends over time, and like you do spark lines and line charts, they really do a good job at that, and so that's what we opted for.
Yeah, I think it was just, we've seen, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the way that the New York Times had thrown the bar chart into the masthead, and you know that was the first time we saw these just supreme outliers visualized. It's like, oh, they've gone through the borders of the charts. I mean, that is amazing. And I just didn't quite feel it the same with this one. It seemed like the color ramp was just too extreme. But you're all right. You are all correct. This is the brilliance of this whole debate. It's like it's all about nuances and guidelines, making decisions, understanding these challenges, right? You know, if you do this without thinking about it, then you've probably made a mistake. If you make these decisions having thought about it and considered about it, then you know what, you're on safe ground, whatever I might think about it, or Steve or Amanda or Jeff.
So I know that if we could just everyone ignore the comments for the time being, we're working on that situation right now.
I think we have taken care of it. My apologies. Excellent. Congratulations. This is the first time I have been Zoom bombed.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share that wonderful occasion with my esteemed friends and colleagues and all of you who are there, and I apologize. We will do what we can to make sure that doesn't happen again.
So with that, we are going to go ahead and I think, anything else we need to say about the joys of looking at this unemployment chart, or we feel okay?
I'm good. I feel like I've unloaded my grief.
All right.
Existential angst is more.
Existential angst.
Existential, yeah. My
existential.
Angst.
A neologism to go with the neomorphism.
Oh, brilliant. Talking of existential angst, let's move on to this.
Here we are, ready for some existential angst, I think, by a lot of people. Or maybe you decided you loved this. I don't know. So we are going to actually start before we dig in and give any of our opinions. We wanted to throw it out there to you on looking at this tornado chart, as we're affectionately calling it. But if you saw this, this is looking at deaths per day from coronavirus by different countries, represented by the different colors. Take a peek at it for a moment. We'll leave it here for a second, just in case you haven't had a gander before. And if you could, go to menti.com. You'll see this at the top of your screen. You can do it in a browser. There's no app. And you can use the code 645681. Again, that code is 645681. And once you're in the Menti poll, you'll see an opportunity to go ahead and see this screen just like I am. And when I pivot to the next page, we're going to ask you to give us a ranking on how far across the spectrum of all the screaming cats, in a nod to the screaming cats of this chart chat session, over to I love it, you feel about this specific visualization. So I see people joining on the Menti. Great. Thanks for the hearts. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to pivot the view. We'll dig back into this view in a minute. If you want to go ahead and answer the question, what do you think of this beautiful tornado chart, which I have no better name for? I'm seeing the numbers creeping up on our lollipop, Steve. I don't know. If you're not familiar with Menti, what Menti does is it's showing us functionally an area chart view in the back of this, but that's the distribution of all the different responses that we have. And then in the front, it's showing us what the average score is. So this is on a 0 to 10, or I think a 1 to 10 scale for any of you who are answering this question. I would love to, we'll pivot back to this in a minute, but if you have any thoughts, what 3 words would you use to describe this beautiful and glorious chart? Thanks for kicking our troll out before we let people go ahead and add in words, Steve. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, yeah, we've got a troll that's making things a little
messy. These are some great words: confusing, chaotic. How are we doing on our scoring? All right, still at like a 3.2. All right, there we go. Stay here. Oh. Interesting, messy. I mean, we could do some thematic analysis here of how these come out. But I think the things coming out in front here are confusing is sitting here in the front and center. And I know that that's the conversation that came out from a lot of DataViz folks. Steve, do you want to share a little bit more about some of the digging you did about this tornado chart, just to give us all a little bit more context?
I would be happy to. Give me one moment to just get a couple of things queued up here.
Sure. Let's let everyone continue to throw their words in. What are some of the other good ones in here? Experiment gone bad. That's nice.
So,
do we get a chance to rate the word cloud too?
You know, Menti is designing this for me, Jeff. This is not my personal design, but it is a very rainbow and thematic word cloud, I think.
So, folks, I'm not able to, I'm going to say, avoid the chat for now. My apologies. And we'll see how things continue. And we'll try to take the intelligent questions that are in there. In any case, let me share my screen. And so this creation that we saw, the tornado chart, the 7 circles of hell chart, whatever, comes from Danny Dorling, this is a website, and he's a professor at Oxford and has a new book coming out. And my first take on this thing was, this is such an odd chart. But he has a new book called Slow Down. And I've only taken a smattering of this and a quick look at these things. And well, one of the things is that all these charts have in common is they're one of the most complicated type of charts to take in without animation. They're a connected scatterplot, where the x-axis isn't time. So, I'll show you an example here of this thing. Slow down for U.S. student debt and how it's waxing and waning and going back and forth. And I think the thesis is that eventually things reach a stabilization point. They're chaotic and then eventually go back. This one was interesting. Hold on. Is this the one with the cars? Population imagery. It's one where we actually see cars driving on this thing. No, that's not the one. I won't keep looking for it. But, and it may be, once you get used to looking at these charts and seeing what they're about, maybe they're easier to understand. But I think a connected scatter plot is by far one of the most difficult. By the way, he's making all the data and how he's producing this readily available. I'll show you what it looks like. Here it is in Excel. Jeff did some spelunking on this and realized most of the Excel work was just to smooth things out. But here's, if you want to see the data and how it was constructed, if you want to see people's, some of people's reactions to it, this crazy stuff going back and forth. Alberto Cairo noted that he has a new book coming out called Slow Down, and which he's going to make the case for why these charts may be useful in understanding various phenomena. And then, it caught a lot of people's attention. So, well, how does this thing work? And, oh, gee, I'm sorry, I can't give credit to whom built this. But if I want to play with this and say, hey, I want to show a decrease and an increase, here's how it would be rendered in this type of chart. So, my initial reaction to this was, oh my gosh, this is a screaming cat. There must be an easier way to show this. But looking at some of the other things that Professor Dorling is producing, maybe it just requires a deeper understanding. For my audience who have a bear of a time understanding connected scatterplots, I think this is a pretty tough read. So with that, I will stop sharing.
I went for a run this morning, and I think this chart occupied my brain for the entire time because I'm like, but it stopped people in their tracks. But it seemed to show something that was predictable. But it caught people. He's got a thesis around the whole book about how the world swings from left to right. But it was a chaos, crazy mess of color that people can't understand. Again, it was a great run. But again, my existential angst was highly high. I have no answer, no definitive answer.
Hey, folks, just to, has been pointed out, it looks like maybe chat is safe. Don't know. I'll try to. My colleagues are ridiculously good at being both able to present and monitor what's going on in chat and Q&A. I am not good at doing either of those things independently, let alone doing.
We just know when to stop listening, Steve.
Yeah,
You're also welcome if you're avoiding the chat. You feel free to put any questions in the question and answer panel. I've cleaned that out.
Well, our friend, were you able to clear the Q&A? Our friend was there.
Don't look at the dismissed panel. Just go to the open and answered ones. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them there too. I will say, so I find connected scatterplots in general really challenging to make sense of, and are really kind of tricky to look at, and I don't get a lot of value from them personally. But when you pulled up the example, Steve, of the motion piece, I find it really hard to find good examples of how motion is used as kind of a visual encoding. And a lot of times motion feels gratuitous, or animations for the sake of animations or something like that. But here, where motion is used to encode some additional piece of information, and you can get a feeling of things slowing up or slowing down or speeding up, I actually find that that's a really interesting layer to this, though it doesn't come across in the static image we saw on Twitter.
The slowing down and speeding up, because I don't usually see that. But every time, and I'm sure it's occurring to Jeff and Andy, every time I've seen a scatterplot that people understand and get, it's usually accompanied by animation. And probably the most famous example is Hans Rosling Gapminder 2006 TED Talk, where that is in fact a connected scatterplot when he shows the trails for Vietnam and the United States. And it's because it's animated and because he's explaining what's going on, you go, oh my God, this is absolutely brilliant.
Animated and narrated is it's the narration as well, which I think is also key.
I cannot agree with. Oh my God, we're supposed to be disagreeing with each other, and I'm agreeing with
plenty.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't 100% of disagreement during the book writing, Steve. You know, sometimes we did get a book out of the door.
No, I would say the Venn diagram, and there are no Venn diagrams in the book. We show that there's, probably a pretty solid, sweet spot of overlap among the three of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, Steve, if we're all agreeing on kind of where we stand on this, and I think there's been some great comments in the chat about connected scatterplots and kind of some parallels in the debates about Sankey's. Feel free to keep going in the chat or in the after hours. I know, Steve, you had pulled up a couple other screaming cats. Do I have that right? Or a couple other things for us to look at to wrap us up?
No, they weren't screaming cats. These were, gosh, aren't these things just wonderful?
Well then, that's a much happier note to end on.
Happy days.
Hold on a sec. Let me, share the screen. We'll do a lightning round thing here. I want to show a Makeover Monday. So one of my favorite practitioners in data visualization is Roddy Zakovich, and I've been wanting to kind of say why I like his work so much. So here was a Makeover Monday exercise from a number of years ago, and showing Snapchat is top with teens, and here's the data, and here's the original graph that was produced, and we're showing that Snapchat, maybe 2.5 years ago was down here, and now it's of the tools you use, which is your favorite, which is the first one. How would you visualize this? And Mafouj Khan did this as a waffle chart. And here's one of my favorite practitioners is Corey Jones. And I want you to look at something here, which is he's using a technique that was pioneered in Tableau by Roddy Zakovich. Now, this chart, by the way, which I'm not a huge fan of, is Roddy calls it a area area bump chart. It's a native chart to Power BI called a ribbon chart. I find whenever I see these things, it just kind of reminds me of this. But let me show you the ones that I gravitated towards. So,
Steve, for those of us not of the same age as you,
are you going to tell me that there are people?
I'm going to guess there are people who don't know the cultural. Well, maybe at least they're named on the right hand side.
Okay, so
sorry, Jeff. Carry
on. In any case, this always gets a big laugh in the workshops, and the workshops are not just attended by people of my vintage. Thank you, Andy.
I'm sorry to disrail you. Carry on.
So here is one from Colin Wojciech, and let me show you what Roddy came up with. So Roddy can out-curvy anybody if he wants to, and he said, "Oh, I think I'd do this." And I just think that tells the story wonderfully. So the next item is I've become an absolute diehard fan of the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo's daily briefings. Though I've often been frustrated with the charts he will show. Some of them are very good, and think, but wouldn't this be better? wouldn't it have more impact or be clearer if you did it this way? And Georgia Lupi and her firm Pentagram made over all these things and showed examples of it and walked through it and the redesign. And because it's stuff that so many people are looking at daily, having a look at, oh, you're right, these things that were done this way, maybe we'll render them this way. It's absolutely brilliant, and there's a whole walkthrough about it. So I want to do a quick lightning round, not end with screaming cats, but a shout out to Roddy Zakovich and to Georgia Lupi and Pentagram.
Somebody asked if you could show Roddy's slope graph again, I think.
Gosh, you people are just so demanding.
Yeah.
I think that's the one they were asking for. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
People want to see more yellow submarine dashboard styles. I'm all in favor of that.
They're no, Andy. Someone's gonna do it.
I know, and I'm going to send it to you on a private message and go, look what you made them do, Steve. Gwyn, on the pentagram style, Gwyn asked, what are the lines below the summary? They're all hang on. What are the lines below summary? So what are those yellow sloping lines at the top?
Hold on.
Underneath the word summary?
The yellow sloping lines were the R-naught calculation, I think.
No,
sorry. Go back to the pentagram slide.
Here's the whole pentagram stuff, and rather than trying to figure out what all these things are and us musing about it and seeing it,
all right.
There's a whole thing and a PDF, and it walks through.
Are we saying that's your homework, class? Some
of the best work I've seen really humanizing some of the data. I mean, Georgia Lupi and her team did a great job, and particularly those illustrations that kind of look like a constellation or a smattering of stars in the sky representing lives lost. I just found really hit home for me. So if you haven't explored these, I'd highly encourage that you do. With that, I think it might be about time for us to go ahead and do a little bit of a wrap up and point people to where they can stay connected. So we've covered most of our pieces for today that we talked about. We want to make sure that you're aware of when the next Chart Chat Live is happening. We'll work on our security situation. It'll be Friday, June 5th, same time, 11 a.m. We're hoping this time works for folks. So we'll be doing our next Chart Chat Live then. You can sign up already, or we'll be able to sign up over on the Chart Chat webpage. The recording of this session will also be posted on the Chart Chat webpage on bigbookofdashboards.com if you want to share this with your colleagues and thought it was valuable or interesting. There are upcoming additional workshops and there are resources. Steve, do you want to say a word quickly about the upcoming workshops and resources?
Absolutely. So, these live workshops that Jeff, Andy, and I have done and that I was doing roughly once a month. No one's doing in-person workshops, and Jeff is prepared for either to go to the bank today, if you see his smiling face over there, or in any case, you can now take the Big Book of Workshops, the Building World-Class Business Workshops dashboards online, 2 half-day sessions, and there's the URL for it. You can go to bigbookofdashboards.com or datarevelations.com. And I think there are 4 or 5 slots left. Would love to see people attend.
Great. And then just for anyone who wants to join us, there is the official now Chart Chat after party. It'll be starting now. Steve will open up a new Zoom environment. Anyone who wants to stay on and chat and talk all about the different topics from today or raise other questions, feel free to go ahead and hop on there. We would love to further that conversation. Unfortunately, I won't be able to join us today, but looking forward to joining the next session in June if this turns out to be something that we want to continue. So with that, I really appreciate just how focused everyone was, despite some of our distractions. Thank you all for all the kind of thoughtfulness on looking at all these pieces. And Jeff, your ability to teach people concepts and help me understand graphic design better is unparalleled.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Hope see a bunch of you at bit.ly/cc13talk. Hope to see almost all of you there. And I'm going to end this meeting so I can start that one. Thank you so much, everyone.